In our series Green Warriors, today we're talking about a homegrown FMCG major, Dabur, that has recently announced that it is India's first company that has become plastic waste neutral. Now, what does that mean? According to their statement, they say that they collect and recycle the same amount of plastic each year that they use to manufacture and package their products. Now, it's an interesting move and an interesting statement to make because the FMCG sector does, by design, consume a lot of plastic, all the packaging that is required, and recycling it is a big concern. So how will this really work? What are the other steps that Dabur and other FMCG companies can take to make this a healthier, cleaner planet? And a bit of insight on what is happening in the sector. For all of that, I'm joined today by Mohit Malhotra, CEO of Dabur India. Mr. Malhotra, thank you so much for speaking with us. Great to have you on the show. Let me begin by asking you about this initiative. It's a public announcement, of course, but where has the thought come from that we will collect and process the same amount of plastic that we consume?
Tamana, thank you for having me for this edition of yours. So I think one thing is that vision of the organization is Dabur's vision is to dedicate ourselves to health and well-being of the communities and the consumers and the customers that we serve through in a FMCG way, and that's what we are, a FMCG company. So this is in line with our vision and mission to what we guys do. So this is one initiative that we've taken almost around 4 years back. We had conducted a pilot project in Delhi, NCR and Gujarat in 18-19. So we, in the first year, collected, processed and recycled around 4,000 metric ton. It was a pilot project that we're running. We were recycling around 4,000 metric ton of plastic. And this initiative, although we had enough of teething problems, but we were not deterred by the teething problems. And we then extended it to 10 states in the subsequent year. And we recycled around 12,000 metric tons of plastic. In subsequent third year, there was COVID. So all our initiatives were actually pushed back by the COVID pandemic. So starting in the current fiscal year, we said that now we'll be committing ourselves to undertaking to recycle the entire plastic that we put out there. We almost on an annual basis put out around 22,000 metric tons. And we said that 22,000 metric tons should be recycled. And there's a whole value chain which is associated with plastic. And we had a good learning curve of around 3 years before we could to complete the plastic neutrality here. So in the current year, we've been able to, by today, December itself, we've been able to be a completely plastic waste neutral company. We put out around 26,000 metric tons and we've recycled around 29,000 metric tons as we go along by the end of this fiscal year. So we'll actually not be plastic waste neutral, but we'll be more plastic waste positive as a company. And it's a very integral part of our ESG initiatives. Yeah.
Sure. So give me a sense of how this actually happens, because you're clearly going and, the team is picking up plastic, not necessarily that is produced from your packaging, but you're going to cities and villages and towns and picking up plastic and recycling it. So how are you actually doing this? How big is the team and how are you enlisting local communities?
Yeah, so it's a fairly complicated sort of a process because it is just not our own initiative by which we do it. It's actually got a government intervention also. So there is a prescription which is made by central pollution control boards and state pollution control boards. And everywhere there's a different jurisdiction. So you have to work within the guardrails of the jurisdictions of Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Boards and guidelines of the ESG, which are there in the governance. So we worked within that. So what we actually do is, so we've got a team of NGOs, which are non-government organizations, and these NGOs are further connected to the waste segregation agencies or waste picking agencies, should I be saying. So these waste picking agencies are also regulated by the government and they are authorized by the government, by the pollution control boards. So it's a full-fledged network nationwide which is available of the NGOs and the waste collection agencies which are authorized. So the waste collection agencies have got rack pickers. These rack pickers are trained, and we guys actually give them the kits so that which are gloves and the masks and the picking sticks are given by Dabur to them, and we fund this entire value chain. So they go out there, they pick the plastic. After picking the plastic, they send it to segregation centers. In the segregation centers, the waste is segregated. And this is a recyclable waste and non-recyclable waste. The recyclable waste is further sent to recycling centers. In the recycling centers, this waste is converted into tables, into mats, into umbrellas, into which also Dabur gives them a buyback guarantee, and we buy at a little bit higher price, and which we actually use it. The non-recyclable waste, which is segregated, is sent to cement kilns, etc., where it is used as a fuel to replace the fossil fuels, which is also very polluting.
Yeah.
So this is the entire chain which is there, and we've been able to recycle, as I told you, 26,000 metric tons. So broadly, this is the chain.
Sure. How much does it cost the company? You mentioned that this is part of your ESG initiatives, but is it a significant cost? Is it something that you're looking to scale up?
Yeah, so the cost will keep mounting as you keep putting more plastic out there and how much of plastic you recycle. So we incur approximately a cost of 5 crores to around 8 crores to recycle this 26,000 metric tons. And this cost will keep increasing as the amount of plastic that you recycle keeps increasing. And so it majorly comes out of, but it's something which is good for the consumer, and we want to incur this particular cost.
Sure. It does not necessarily, though, solve the essential problem that not just your company and not just in the FMCG space, but the problem that we have overall, that plastic is the primary source of packaging that we know of. And it just does not disappear, right? You have to keep recycling it, and it keeps mounting. Are there any long-term solutions that your company is working towards?
See, I think recycling of plastic is the best solution, because that's how you create a circular economy. Whatever you put out there, that you kind of recycle, it gets back converted into raw material, and this raw material you keep using. So you limit the production of the additional plastic and the fossil fuels that you convert. So you keep converting and reconverting. So what you do is that whenever you're recycling a plastic, this recycled plastic can be back again used as a raw material for your packaging material. So you limit the amount of fossil fuels that you convert into plastic. So that's one way of actually doing it. The second way of doing it, which is not still recognized in India, is using biodegradable plastics. So what you do is you add an extra chemical in the plastic that automatically, over the shelf life of the product, like if, for example, we produce a shampoo and shampoo gets into a bottle which is a PET or HDP, you can add a chemical ingredient in the PET and HDP material, then automatically it will degrade itself into the soil. But that costs you extra money to incur, and turns out to be more expensive. So your shampoo pricing becomes pretty expensive, and the consumer will not purchase it. So still India is a little bit far from that. That's what is happening in the West. So I remember when I was in Dubai, we were using biodegradable plastics in our shampoo bottles, and that is the way that we were doing it. So besides plastic, there is also paper. So the amount of paper that we use is huge in India, and this paper is all coming out of culling the trees. So we are the first, another initiative that we've taken as per our ESG initiative is removing the carton from our toothpaste. Toothpaste already comes in a lamy tube. You don't need a carton on top of that and waste so much of paper. So we're the first company to get rid of that paper. Dabur Red toothpaste is the first toothpaste available in selective modern trade, which is it's available without the paper. And we've saved roughly around 200 metric tons of plastic in paper by using this. And by this, we've saved roughly around 10,000 trees from being cut. So, that's one initiative, another initiative that one has taken here. Yeah.
So, Just to press further on the point of biodegradable plastic, because that really is the future solution we need to look for. And this is the basic problem when you want to implement such solutions in a market like ours, very price sensitive market. In the current scenario, it's an impossible thought, already hit by inflation, etc. But where do you think we need to move forward to allow for a possibility of using biodegradable plastic at some point? Do you think there is requirement for government intervention, help, things like that? Where will this be funded from?
So I think there are a couple of things. First thing, I think government needs to mandate even the recycling and plastic waste neutrality is still not mandated by the government. It is done by the own initiative of the companies. So I think going forward from next year on, government will have a regulation which will mandate the companies to recycle plastic, and there'll be goals which will be given to the corporates for doing it. So not just looking at a profit motive, but also looking at a larger community and sustainability sort of the end goal. So the government has to take this initiative. And when it comes to biodegradability, because it is coming at a higher cost, I think government has to mandate it. Till the time it's done by the government, it may not really happen on its own initiative by the corporates. That's at least my view. Now, government's new initiative of hydrogen is actually one way that we will move towards more green initiatives in the country, which is a very good move. And also the use of electric vehicles is a very good initiative that the government has actually started. So this will only reduce the use of fossil fuels in the country. So they're good moves. So I think government is making strides, but those have to be not on the initiative of corporates, but somewhere they have to be mandated as well.
And you think mandates are the way to go instead of encouragements or, some kind of concessions?
Well, I think it's both ways. It's both motivation. It is support by the government. It'll be some sort of a subsidy, some sort of incentives given by the governments, and also to discipline. It's important that government needs to put some timelines. Maybe those timelines can be a little easy looking at the pragmatic implementation of all this. But I think it's important that government puts in some timelines and some goals so that we in a disciplined manner can actually achieve those goals.
Yeah, so carrot and stick both required. Since I have you here, Mr. Malhotra, and we very briefly touched upon price sensitivity for consumers and inflation as well, let me just get your assessment of demand right now. Recently, you said that especially for Dabur, rural demand has been growing even better than urban demand because of some planning that has gone into that and expansion plans that have gone into that from your company. But overall, what is the kind of recovery you see in rural demand and urban demand right now? Are we seeing the impact of inflation trickling in onto demand, especially for discretionary items?
Yeah, so I think you've touched upon a very big pain point for all the corporates and the entire FMCG industry. I think inflation is a very, very big pain point that we guys are facing, and the inflation is completely unabated. So we are seeing since Q1 of the current fiscal year, we're sitting in Q4, and the inflation is going on unabated. So we have YTD seen inflation levels of around 10%, and this inflation is hitting us in all commodity baskets, whether it's herbs and spices or it's fossil fuel linked packaging and raw material. So across the board, inflation is very high. And to offset this inflation, we guys have taken up price increases. And because of the price increases, we are seeing a compression of the demand, and compression of the demand is happening across discretionary and also staple. Because what's happening in staple, food is a very big basket, and a lot of inflation is coming out of food. So both discretionary and the staple are seeing compression in demand. And to top it up, there was COVID situation. So consumers, even if they have a disposable income, they rather save the disposable income than spend on discretionary and the staple. So that is what is happening. So if you look at Q1, we saw, rural was little suppressed in Q1, and urban was inching up because of the recovery from COVID. And e-commerce was firing, and modern trade was opening up, and people had started going out. So urban was doing well. Come second quarter, we've seen rural recovery also happen. So rural started inching up well in quarter two. And for Dabur, quarter three has also been great. To your point, 500 basis points higher rural growth as compared to urban growth, which was belying whatever the entire industry was saying. For them, urban was growing better than rural. But now
Yeah.
into the fourth quarter, what we are seeing is that this inflation impact is actually impinging on the rural demand also. So both urban and rural demand and the consumption situation doesn't seem to be great. I think essentially it's all because of inflationary pressures that we are seeing. So while you'll see a price increase driven value growth, but the intrinsic and the underlying volume growth will be under pressure. And that is what we see in Dabur also.
Are you seeing more price hikes being passed on because manufacturers in the FMCG sector has absorbed a lot of that inflation over the last 2 or 3 quarters? Some of it has been passed on, including by your company. But is there more price increase coming?
No, so if you actually try to analyze, you see a WPI, which is the wholesale price index, that is at around 14% level. It's a peak that ever we've seen with the WPI at, and WPI major constituent is food there. So that is what we take in. So if you look at WPI, which is around 13-14%, our inflation is also around 10% in line with WPI. This is what we purchase. So this is an indicator of what we purchase or what we buy from wholesale price index. Now, what we sell is the consumer MRP. That inflation in terms of CPI we see in the range of around 5 to 6% is what the government is. So there's a difference between a 14% and a 6%. This difference is being absorbed by the companies because they are not able to pass on this 10-11% inflation in terms of price increases to the consumer. So what we pass on is only around 5 to 6%, and rest around 6 to 7% is being absorbed, which is getting reflected in the margin compressions which are actually happening in the industry. How are you wanting to mitigate that margin compressions is through cost saving initiatives. And that's what we guys are doing. So we are doing multiple cost saving initiatives which are happening in the company across the board in the value chain to ensure that our operating margins are not impacted because of inflation. That said, there is a limit to which you can reduce your cost. If we find that the cost is not getting reduced, but then push comes to shove, we will have to pass on this inflation to the consumers by second or third round of price increases also. But that will again
So
get
there is a
reflected in the
likelihood.
demand situation. Yes, there could be a likelihood the way we are seeing the situation, but that will have an impact on the volume growth and the demand. So it will get into a little bit of vicious loop, and it's a wait and watch situation for us to see that if the inflation stems or it doesn't.
If I may ask you a little bit more about the compression in demand that you spoke about, and the fact that now in Q4 perhaps rural demand is also getting to be a little tepid. Can you give us any more details on what categories you think that is impacting the most, and how companies like yours and you are strategizing to beat this?
So a couple of things. If you look at the categories, there is a staple category and the food category. Food is something which is very essential. So whenever there's an inflation, consumer cuts back on discretionary product categories. So discretionary product categories will be the ones which will be the impacted most. So when I say discretionary product categories, we look at the syndicated data, we find hair oils, which is discretionary, shampoo to a certain extent is discretionary, home care is discretionary, skin care is discretionary, luxury products are discretionary, to a certain extent durable would be discretionary. So all those sectors will be impacted here. And the ones which are essential, which is more food, there, even if there is a price increase, it doesn't impact the demand so much because that's a necessity and consumers have to purchase that. So staples will not be impacted as much. So you will see discretionary categories, volume growths will come down because there'll be price increases. And in staple, there will be a certain extent of a volume growth continuing going forward because that is the necessity and the consumer has to buy it. In terms of measures, what we are taking, I told you the measures. So it's internal cost cutting. And when you do the cost cutting within the organization, the biggest bucket of cost is the manning, is manpower. So you rationalize the manning as much as possible. You make the organization structures more leaner. You cut on the variable cost. You cut on the fixed cost. So all elements of cost are actually being optimized as much as possible from our side.
Just one last question, sir, on your outlook. The RBI's outlook for inflation is that it will cool off in the next couple of quarters. They don't see it being a big issue. Crude is one factor that no one can really predict right now because of geopolitical situations. But do you see growth now being linked very closely with inflation, and which is why it's unpredictable, or what is the kind of forecast you see for the next couple of quarters?
See, I'm not an economist, so I can't comment upon the entire industry. But when it comes to FMCG, definitely I can comment upon it. To me, the demand is very much closely linked to the inflation and to the price increases that we take. If the price increases are high to offset the inflation, then demand will actually get suppressed in a country where per capita incomes are very low and the economic growth and the GDP growths are also not great as we speak. So in my view, the future is crude prices, like you rightly said, are elevated. We are reaching to around $100. And most of the packaging material in FMCG is linked to crude. It's crude linked. So whether it's PET or it's HDPE or it's specialty chemicals, etc., raw material packaging, majority is linked to crude. And we are the net importers of crude out here. So till the time crude cools off, I don't think the packaging material, which contributes to around 40 to 50% of the total raw material and packaging material cost, will impact here. And that said, what government can actually do is raw materials can be controlled. And that's why we see CPI in the range of around 5% to 6% is because the agriculture output is good. Because the agriculture output is good, the monsoon is predicted to be good, the crop is fine, and there'll be subsidies and MSPs which will be given by the government because that will be more demand driven. So the CPI inflation will be kept under check. So when I say check, the comfort level is in the range of around 5 to 6%, and that's what it will be. As long as the CPI is kept under check and wholesale price index, because it's driven by a lot of food and others, that is unchecked. So there'll be impact coming on the margin compression. Demand may remain a little bit more resilient as we go forward. So government is taking all initiatives to keep that CPI inflation under check. And but I think it's a matter of time. We are also waiting and watching. The situation may not be as glum as I'm maybe projecting here. But I think it's another 1 quarter or 2 quarters when we will lap over a high base of inflation. Once we lap over the high base of inflation, inflation will look like in the range of around 4% or 3 to 4%, which will be manageable. And we will have a flow-through impact of the price increases we've already taken. So therefore, a growth, I think around 7 to 8% next year, once we lap over the bases in the GDP levels, should be achievable. That's what I feel.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Malhotra, for speaking with us on this very interesting initiative of being plastic neutral. Perhaps it's a template that other companies in other industries can also follow, and we can at least reduce the burden on this earth. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tamanna, for having me. Thanks a lot. Yeah, cheers.